here in Vienna. For me, it's my second time. I was here, are we good on sound? I was here about 15 months ago, and I had the winter experience, and I met up with Harold, and he showed me some of the sights of the city, and it's just fantastic being here, getting the summertime version. So thank you for the invitation. So I'm really going to continue the theme from the morning, really, and talking from an architectural point of view, some of the challenges that we have as designers of providing strategies and facilities for designing buildings in cities. So really, I guess I've trying to kind of take on board some of the challenges of what we have to do to create active cities. And I guess one of the particular things that I'd like to reflect on is that over the sort of 20 years that I've been involved in sports facilities, and we've been involved in many traditional swimming pool with a dry sport or a sports hall facility alongside it on the edge of town. In the last few years, we've had to change our thinking, and I would like to think that some of our thinking has been innovative, but I think we've had to respond to new ways in which people engage in activity in cities. Again, just to bring a UK perspective on some of the things that you've heard this morning, such as, inactivity is one of the biggest challenges of our time. Somebody mentioned this morning, it's the equivalent of, it's killing as many people as smoking. And UK government is taking the issue very, very seriously. There are strategies that are being put in place. There's a lot of government money that is going into tackling inactivity, particularly things to do with getting people walking, getting people cycling. And Sport England themselves have been targeting significant resources. And again, they're moving away their emphasis from facilities towards a wider perspective, a more holistic way of getting people engaging in movement and sport. And in the UK, it's fair to say that many of our cities are engaging with this problem. A lot of cities have their own individual plans and strategies. Cities like Liverpool are perhaps leading the way on this, but all cities are now increasingly having their own activity plans to demonstrate strategies for engaging in activity. And again, this graph will echo what some of the speakers this morning have been referring to, in the sense that a lot of the traditional team sports are seeing some declines. And I guess that's reflecting the move for people wanting to participate in activity on demand when they want to do it. So a lot of that is more individualistic and more, maybe more from an adventure perspective. But there were two particular, when we looked at this graph, that were intriguing us, because UK government has put a lot of resources into cycling, particularly cycling, but there is still a small decline. And we've kind of reflected as an office, why, despite all of that money, is there still a decline? And we did a piece of research looking at cities around the world and using big data, things like Strava. This isn't our piece of research, but it's a piece of research we came across, looking how do people choose to move in cities under their own, under their own independence. And when we looked at various cities, there are a lot of patterns of movement. It's perhaps no surprise that people like to move along waterways. People like to move through parks, particularly when there's a linear dimension to those spaces. And I guess reflecting that, there's a lot of really good examples around the world of linear parks, like the High Line in New York. It's become a very sought-after place. Commercial and residential values have increased around that area. It's very successful. Chicago has its own version, the 606. Boston's Greenway, which is kind of decked over an old motorway. We've heard about superkilling. I think it's a well-known example from Copenhagen, was referred to this morning. And again, there are cities around the world that have their own plans and strategies in place for looking at how do we get people moving more successfully through city centres. We did a piece of work for, we're from Newcastle, this is our city, and we did our own piece of research looking at how people moved. So we looked at some of the Strava data, so some of that software. So when people are going for a run or for a walk and they've got their kind of Strava data, so the red lines on this map just track where people are moving voluntarily. And the thicker the red lines show really the more intensive routes. And we just found this quite intriguing. There are some correlations between deprived areas and the wealthier suburbs in the city where people move, but clearly along the river was a kind of very popular area of movement, but also really kind of reinforced the view that we had is that people like being being next to water. They like being around parks. And so we were just looking at this kind of piece of thinking about people moving, cycling, running, either for leisure, which we were interpreting these green concentric circles, or people commuting to go to work, the kind of radial routes that link into cities. And we also found this kind of correlation between, so we wanted to simplify this strategy, but also we overlaid that thinking on economic areas. So where were the new areas where there was investment? Because I think most cities find there isn't money for this stuff, so if it can be piggybacked on other development, other economic issues, there's a better chance that some of these strategies will be fulfilled. And we looked at some demonstration projects ourselves. This is an old railway line near the train station. This is an area of economic regeneration in the city. And again, just using the similar kind of things from the New York High Line, could we create these kind of routes that connect key parts of the city? And again, there were some old bridges in the centre of Newcastle that were tired, unpleasant places to be at night. Could you improve the lighting? Could they be made a bit wider? Could there be more interesting places to engage and get people into the city centres? So that was really just a piece of kind of background. And I guess where we're thinking as designers, it's this kind of responsibility, not just about a sports hall or a swimming pool, but how do we look at cities in the round and what is the wider context in terms of the way we design infrastructure. I want to really just look at some of our work through the prism of three principles, really, that we found are very, very important to us. The first one is flexibility, by which I mean the ability for a building to be able to deal with many different conditions. We can't afford to design sports facilities just for one sport. We need the flexibility for other uses, and over time, things will change. We've already heard this morning of, whether it's through social media or data or the great example from Dickon talking about 10-lane, 50-metre pools and different events that are being used. We know things will change. We have to look at flexibility. The second theme that I'm going to look at is what I've called connectivity, and that's really facilities that engage with non-sporting uses. So whether that's schools or universities or libraries, we're finding increasingly we're having to engage with other kinds of activity issues. And then the third one, really, I've called it verticality, but in terms of engaging with cities, most of the buildings that we look at tend to be quite wide footprints, and space is at a premium, it's at a high value in cities. How do we meet that challenge of building in cities? And a lot of the time we're increasingly looking at having to go vertical, stacking, pools and sports halls in cities to get to where the density of people are within those city locations. So the first example really is to apply some of that thinking, some of that logic to a certain building type that we've had quite a long track record with. It's really to do with velodromes. It could be other facilities, but again, I think the velodrome is a particularly interesting building typology. So I'm going to talk about Derby, but when we've looked at velodromes around the world, they're often very beautiful forms. The structure, the form, the envelope, they're often beautiful icons, but often they don't work. And if you look at the history, certainly of Olympic velodromes going back a number of years, many are white elephants. Less than 50% are still used for cycling. It's a real problem building type. We asked the question why. And one of the things, this is a graph which is attempting to explain how for every square metre of sporting facility, how many people effectively use that square metre per year. And of all the building types, velodromes have the least occupancy, have the least throughput. They're normally very big buildings, 15 to 20,000 square metres, but a very small number, the maximum number of cyclists you can get on a track is 20. So if you do the maths, they're a very, very low occupancy. And so from a business case, they rarely work. So why would you build a velodrome? We were involved in probably one of the most successful velodromes in the world in Manchester in terms of its throughput, and we've had access to a lot of data. It's been fantastic for medals, and Team GB, I think it's fair to say, one of the most successful cycle teams in the world. But when we looked at the data and the analysis of it, even Manchester, which is the most, as I say, well used, it was interesting to see how the infield is used in a velodrome. And the reality is that most of the infield is only ever used about 5% of the year. The D, what we call the cyclist D, this bit, is used intensively because cyclists, before going onto the track, need to prepare, warm up, or in this area here, this is the D. So they own that. That's their home, but they don't need this space. And what we've tried to attempt to do is how can we utilize that space better in the velodrome? Because you've got all these fantastic things you can do in the middle of that track. It's a big space. You can get 3 basketball courts in there, 4 tennis courts. You can have an athletics set up, gymnastics. All of those really useful things. But the problem is that the track acts as a barrier. Because it's one continuous timber track and there's no horizontal part of it, you can't just step over into that central space. Traditionally, you have to go through a tunnel to get into that space. So the velodrome that we did about 8-9 years ago now in Appledorn, it's an Olympic standard. It's got 6,000 seats, but it had the flap here, which is a good thing in one respect. At least it enables the ability to set up the infield vehicles. Equipment can be driven onto that space. So that was part of the strategy for that facility. Again, athletics, indoor athletics can be placed, support accommodation at the side. You can see the flap in that location. And it's held world championships. But when we came to design the Derby Arena velodrome, the client was very, very clear. They didn't want a gap in the track. The cycling fraternity were saying, we don't want a flap in this track because if you put a flap in, it means there's going to be periods of downtime. We can't use the track. Cycling is really popular. And the British Cycling were adamant, we are not going to break this track with a flap. So that gave us a bit of a problem because we were passionate about trying to make this building type multi-use and flexible. So we knew we wanted to have a number of seats. We wanted to be able to put concerts on in the middle, and clearly configurations for all the sporting activities that I've already mentioned. But this is the problem, and the traditional track is about 1.2 meters above the infield, and the only way of getting into that infield is to go via a tunnel or down some steps. It's not good for accessibility. It's not good for visual connections. So we came up with a solution of raising the track a full story. And basically it allows you to get horizontal access for wheelchair users, basketball posts, etc. Equipment can easily be stored underneath. It essentially opens up that central resource, that valuable resource for other sporting uses, and makes it suddenly a lot more multi-use, more flexible, more visible. You come into the building from the kind of cafe spaces, and you can see it buzzing with activity. So the concept sketch really was this idea that the cafe had views, could spill out onto the space, bleacher seating could be pulled out, vehicles could drive underneath the track, there could even be glazing for officers, etc. So the whole of that space could become a vibrant kind of hub of activity. And we still give the cyclists their D. There's their home that they can have permanently, but they can release this piece of space for other activities. And again, the concept section here with this kind of free flow of activity. This was what we call the day-to-day side of the building with fitness, multifunctional spaces. And this end is effectively closed off on a day-to-day basis. It's really for spectator seats, deliveries, and planned. This is the heart of the building that visually connects into those other spaces. And you can just see that again. This is the day-to-day with fitness, spinning studios stacked over the entrance. You've got the track raised up, and you've got the spectator seating on the far side. And we wanted to we saw it first and foremost about an operational thing, about making it successful, but then having set the concept, we like the idea that architecturally the building should reflect what it's doing as a function. So we lifted the skin of the building. We lifted the front up where people come in. We lifted the back up where the servicing takes place. But at the ends, we pulled the skin down. Where it didn't need to engage with people or activity, we pulled the skin of the building down. And that's what gave it this kind of characteristic shape with the entrance space where we want to engage. And then the skin of the building is really trying to reflect the movement of the track. And then we've actually got these kind of splits, or what we call eyes. It's almost like kind of splits in a timber track. We pull those apart to get views in and out of the building. And again, one of the working drawings which shows the track construction elevated with the spinning fitness studio stacked above the entrance space. And the other working drawing, again, for those of you that have been on the track, at the end, it's very steep here. It's about 42 degrees, and it's great fun cycling around those tracks. But again, just some of the imagery that shows this ability to have simultaneous activity happening. So there can be, cyclists going around quite happily with people playing badminton or basketball, netball, etc. And the great thing is that, people that are going to play badminton are seeing, cyclists. They want to have a go. They want to go to that cyclist D and want to participate in this activity. Great views from the gym and the spinning studios, again, over the cycling activity. We're trying to make these visual connections within the building. And as I say, virtually every other velodrome in the world is something that you go into and you have no sense of the activity that's taking place within that. And whilst the driver has been flexibility and multi-use, it's still great to see the top top cyclists enjoying coming to the facility to ride there. So that was really my kind of first piece about the importance of flexibility. We've applied it to a Velodrome arena, but that same philosophy could apply to other building types. The next trend that we're seeing in the UK is really connecting sport facilities with other users. And this next example, Hebburn Central in the northeast, some of you may have seen it. It's been kind of widely published. But effectively, it's a community facility, but it also has a library in it. It has a customer support centre. So if you've got a complaint about the municipality or your waste bins aren't being emptied on time, you can go here to complain. All of these activities, so library, service centre, being mixed with sporting activity. And the challenge we had was it was a very run-down part of the, it's about 10 miles from Newcastle, this place. It had a shipbuilding history. And in fact, I'll come on to the materiality of it, but it was the kind of the metal, the rusting steel that was part of the inspiration for the cladding choices. But it was a difficult background, and there were some aging sports facilities and libraries, some of which had to be closed down. There was a lot of public consultation with local users in terms of getting their feedback and opinions on what the new facility should contain, how it should look. And it was an important part of a wider piece of placemaking and regeneration with the building here, with basically in a residential area. So you can see from the plan there's a 25-metre pool, there's a learner pool in here. In itself, nothing innovative, just a kind of traditional wet offer, dry sports box at the back. But the mix of containing it with a library, customer services, inquiry desk, and some support accommodation in here just makes this a very lively space. And we've even found that normally when people have got a complaint about the local authority, they're angry, they come to this building and somehow they're calmer and they can see people swimming, and there's genuinely a mutual benefit of those activities taking place in the same space. Architecturally, we wanted to keep it really simple. We've got a simple eaves line running all the way around. There's a 2-storey support accommodation in the middle with fitness at the upper level, and then there's the pool hall, and further down in section there's the library in that the same volume. And the swimming pool, again, natural light, we feel very, very strongly about. It's really important, and that was made reference to this morning from the Copenhagen examples. It's important to get the amount of light right, so there's not too much glare from a safety point of view, but the visual connection, the amenity value of swimming in a beautiful place is, we find, is really, really important. But this is what makes it really special, that pool, that the fact that there's a library place, that either people are coming to listen to social media or audios or getting books out. People still do read books. It's great to do that and then see the swimming pool, or vice versa, people coming for a swim and then they will go and spend 20 minutes looking at newspapers or engaging with the library. Again, some of the spaces, part of the library, and this is the inquiry desk, and there's a customer services as part of that same space. So the space feels just a lovely place to be. We've had a lot of positive feedback about the nature of that environment. Not everybody likes this Corten steel, but it just felt really appropriate for the kind of harsh setting, and it's been really successful. The community have really taken the building to the hearts. Sustainability-wise, it's also given us the opportunity to take heat out of the library spaces, which needed some cooling, and then we've been able to put that back into the pool. So from an energy sustainability point of view, it's been very successful. And we've put a lot of work into the energy performance of the skin, of the cladding, to make sure that that was as airtight as possible, very highly insulated, and a lot of prefabrication of these core 10 panels in the factory to give it that aesthetic. And again, very successful in terms of the first 6 months of operation, in terms of the figures of throughput. I think everybody connected with the project's been delighted at the success of it, and it's also won a lot of design awards, which we're very proud of. This next piece is something that we've seen. It's almost been kind of sprung upon us in many ways, in terms of some of the commissions that we've either won in competition, in terms of building in city centres. There's 2 projects that I'm going to show that have this theme of verticality. This first one is a water park right in the middle of a city centre. And by water park, I do mean flumes and lazy rivers and kind of wave pools, etc. And there was a compact site in this city centre. We won the competition with some ideas, but Coventry is a city famous for these three spires, and we had to design the building. I think it's this one here next to this building. Just before, this is what we didn't want. We didn't want this aesthetic of this spaghetti monster of all these flumes hung on the outside of the building, particularly in a city centre. And it might be fine on a edge of city, on a retail park, but we said to the client, we're not going to do that. But when we looked at the brief, we found that we did a lot of analysis with the site that was available, but we couldn't fit it. You know, normally you'd build a swimming pool at ground floor level. We couldn't do that. The site wasn't big enough. So we looked at a strategy where we knew we had to stack some of these swimming pools on top of each other. And we came up with this concept where basically we have this drum. It's a circular drum which contains all of the flumes. We didn't want to express the flumes on the outside of the building. We just wanted them to be contained. I think of it like snakes in a basket. I wanted them all kind of contained in there. But then you had there's levels. So this is the entrance level. There is a traditional 25-meter lap pool and spa at ground floor level. But at the first floor is where there's a fitness and wet change. So people coming to the water park, they go to first floor to change. There's a kind of a kids' water park experience here. But the main water features are up 3 stories. So we had to have a structure that could take these swimming pools, and we were very conscious of waterproofing and all the sensible stuff we have to do. But again, we were very minded of how it engages in the city, and particularly these 3 spires, how people connect with the city. There was this strong green route from the train station. We were very conscious of how we make public realm and the quality of the spaces. So we wanted to keep the base of the facility quite tight and give space back to the city, which is why we have this very tight form of the building. And we also, difficult as it was, wanted to be respectful to this one of the spires. We're building very, very close to the spire, but we've got glass on three on one side, but over 3 floors. So there's a spa in here. This is the wet change for the water park, and then there's views up inside this drum of looking at the 6 rides, flumes, etc. inside the building. And then just in terms of the journey up through the building, this is the ground floor with an entrance sequence, the lap pool, spa, some dry change in that location. You come up to the first floor, there's a fitness offer here. This is all the wet change. And we wanted people, once they'd changed into their wet gear, to go on a spiral up through the center of the building. So they come out here and they connect onto this spiral with the toddlers and kind of kids wet play area in the center. They wrap up round here and then arrive at the third floor. This is the lazy river. This is the wave pool with a shallow area, cafe space, with views down into the kids area. So this is the main wet deck, and this has views out over the city. So here, there's a glazed strip, and you can see the 3 spires across the city centre, which, again, we felt was quite important for that experience. Then you've got some of the staircase here, which provides access to the controlled spaghetti and tentacles of the monster that sits above to create this really, really high-octane experience. And really something that gets people to come back on a regular basis into the city centre. It's still under construction, but this gives you a sense of the kind of bright colour, and perhaps why we didn't want this as architects on the outside of the building. But we think it's going to be a really high-energy experience inside that space. And you can get a sense here, still under construction. It's due for completion in about 3 or 4 months' time. So verticality was really, really important. We had to go down that route just to fit everything in that building. But it's a similar story. This is mainly dry sports now. And I guess this does 2 of the things that I was talking about. It connects in with another use. In this case, it's a school. But also it's stacked over 5 stories, and it's next to a stadium, Sunderland Football Club, and there's a 50-metre pool here. And one of the challenges we had with the brief is, on a tight site in a city centre, how do we get all of those activities in? And it wasn't just any ordinary school. This is for kids that have been excluded from mainstream education. These are the naughty kids that can't get on in regular school. And the beacon of light is really the charity of the football club. And it's really about outreach into the community, engaging with people from difficult backgrounds, particularly young children, but also across a whole bunch of ages. And really, the original brief that we had was for a football barn and sports hall, which were connected together. And we had a similar issue of how do we fit all that in on the site? There wasn't really enough space. So we took the early decision for the competition to separate out the football barn. And we took the view that that has different characteristics. It's got a 3G or a 4G artificial turf pitch. It doesn't need to be heated, unlike the sports hall, which does need heating and control. So really we created this brick box. The budget was very, very tight. It's a charity. It was kind of the bottom end of the range that we could afford to spend on a building like this. But we created a highly insulated brick box. We put the football barn on the roof. But the heart of the building really is the school, the world of work. There's a place for people to encourage to get into the workplace with local businesses, providing kind of practical courses within this building. So we're creating an atrium in here that's got a lot of visibility. But this was a compact 60 metres square. It freed up the landscape to, we were able to put in quite a lot of 5-a-side football pitches, which created money for the charity, and that helped subsidise some of their charitable work that they're doing inside the building. And again, just in terms of the sequence, it measures 60 metres by 60 metres, the brick box. There's 3 basketball courts or 12 badminton courts with changing at this lower level. Then you come up to the main entrance at first floor, which has got a cafe and some support education spaces. You go up a level, you've got this kind of world of work spaces with kind of catering and car manufacturing and and other activities from local businesses. And then you've got some office space here. And then really the school, for the kind of challenged kids, are sitting at this level with views down. And part of the philosophy was really, almost literally, to use the power of sport to inspire these kids from difficult backgrounds. That there's almost a kind of hidden message that if you do good, if you stay learning, you too can come and play on this pitch on the top of the building, which is this beacon across the city. So we created this kind of 7-on-7 or 9-a-side football pitch. And I quite like this little space here. They have a program called Little Dribblers. And this is for footballers that are from 18 months old to about 3 years. They start really early in Sunderland. And this was just a really small place where they could just start to kick a football about. And it's just really cute seeing these little kids play there. And then they can look forward to playing in the bigger space. And then this has got a cheap polycarbonate enclosure with a fabric roof. And it's really just an umbrella that wraps around that space. So you've got the sports hall at the lower level. You've got the atrium space with a cafe and learning spaces. And then this processional stair takes you up through the building with the barn on top of the roof. An image of the barn. It's just really a great space to be in, and inspires all the kids to want to come up to the top of the building. And then just some of the external shots and the way it's lit up at night. It is literally this beacon. It's very, very simple on the outside of the building, but you could see all the activities that's taking place. And obviously, being next to Sunderland Football Club and being their charity, when the club are playing, they can do clever things with the lights and have home and away colours with the beacon box. So really, it is literally the kind of power of sport to motivate other people in life. And I'm really just going to finish with one last project. This project is not in the UK, this is in Holland. And again, it captures some of those things that I've talked about things like flexibility and connectivity, which are really, really important to us. And then the brief for this was, again, a mix of stakeholders. There was a university which wanted sporting spaces. There's a local, in fact, there's 2 schools. The local municipality wanted a series of dry sport facilities, and there was a housing association involved. It's a massive building. 33,000 square meters of dry sport activity, all with these different users wanting different kinds of activities. Sorry, I don't know what I've done there. I've clicked out of. Let's see if I can just get that back to. Yeah, so a lot of different stakeholders as part of the brief. And this sits in a central park in the centre of Den Haag, in an historic park. There are a lot of sensitivities about putting any form of building in this park. But the site was chosen here, and we wanted the building to reinforce this sort of sense of connection and movement. There's a trail of walking and running, and we wanted the building to kind of reinforce that. So I'll just use the machine. And so one of the kind of key issues was just trying to find a way of reducing the scale of what is a massive building in this very, very kind of sensitive and historic park. So we created a very kind of simple strategy of separating all the sports arenas up. At the front of the building here, there's a sort of central external space, but we wanted to create a really, really compact form. And we have this inclined ribbon made out of stainless steel, which we did a lot of work on the geometry of that to get the least impact we have on in terms of the park itself, but also create this sense of movement. So everything was around getting people active, creating kind of movement, encouraging people to move within the space. This is the courtyard space where there's this, we want to encourage informal activity on the route through into the entrance of the building. Taking people through into an atrium that's got kind of cafes. There's a school up on the right-hand side here. And then the main circulation routes to the sports fields, and spectators are at the higher level. And again, just a series of facilities, indoor beach volleyball, which is not often done, but it was a carefully controlled environment with heated sand that was we put in. Some big courts for handball and basketball, gymnastics facilities, and just to finish with that, the overarching building sitting in the park. So really, just to finish, really reflecting some of the trends that we're having to engage with about cities, about movement, whether it's people cycling or walking. We're having to connect. It's a big trend that we're seeing in the UK and increasingly further afield. And we have to make these facilities as flexible as possible. So thank you very much for your time. I think I'm the last speaker, so thank you very much. Hope you found it useful.